Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us, and thanks to my friends joining us as well. Coach Tuberville, I'm sure, is finishing a vote, but we'll go ahead and get started. I think just to start with, we should thank the American Principles Project for all the work that they've done helping us organize this. And today we're here to discuss the gender industrial complex. The gender industrial complex. It's something I practiced obstetrics for 25 years. And couldn't imagine I'd be here today. I can't imagine there'd be a day when I have to fight harder on the halls of Congress than I do back home in the delivery room to protect young men and young women. I think as a physician, some of my biggest concerns up here is I took care of many pre-adolescent girls, and they came in with different problems, and I always told the mom, let's try to get through this without any scar tissue. There's some things that are irreversible, and like pregnancy is irreversible, and STDs are irreversible. But here today, we're protecting young lady and men from genital mutilation because that's what this is. I don't think anyone understands the consequences of these surgeries, that these folks will be facing long-term pain, long-term suffering, long-term changes. I've had to do surgeries on young ladies that didn't have everything come out anatomically correct, and it's a greatest challenge in the world for what these kids have. And just to think that they're not emotionally mature yet. So many of them have mental illnesses going along with this, and it's just hard for me to believe that we're doing irreversible damage to these young men and women. And it's just not the surgery that's irreversible, it's the chemicals that are irreversible as well. Many of the hormones that they're using cause irreversible damage as well. And we'll dive a lot deeper into this, but I want to turn it over to, and I'm going to introduce everybody as we go along here. I'm going to introduce Terry Schilling next, who is our co-host here with the American Principles Project. Terry, thank you for your leading on this. You took over the reins of APP. How long has this been going on now?
Quite some time, at least 2014, 2013.
2014. So we appreciate your leadership and your leadership in the Big Family Initiative, and I'm just going to give it to you for a couple minutes remarks.
Well, look, I'm a normal guy. I grew up in the Midwest. I'm the eldest of 10 kids. I have 7 children myself. And before you think it's too crazy, we just really love kids, and we love our family. It's the center of our life, and it makes slaving away at this 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. job every day a lot easier. I go to work to provide for my family. It's actually the center of my life, and I also love politics, and I love public policy, and I am very concerned not just about my kids, but about the future of our country. Chesterton, I think, has an allegory about coming across a fence and tearing it down, and before you really know why that fence exists. And I think that there are a lot of things that we have in our life that exist for very good reasons. I think men and women are different. I don't think that's controversial to say. I think they complement each other very well. And I think that we're all more dependent on each other than we want to admit. And that's why this fight is so important, is because if you're sterilizing children at their earliest ages, before they can even consent to sexual activity themselves, you're not going to have a good time. We need more people in this world. People are good. They are not pollution. And we're no man's an island. We all depend on each other. And this movement from the beginning has been about saving America, but mostly about protecting our children. And it's very common sense. We've poll tested this. We've focus grouped it. America's still good. American people are still decent. They understand that there's a lot of money being made here. And I think part of what today's all about is talking about how much money is getting made by this industry. And it is an industry. It's not a civil rights movement. But also how are we going to move forward to protect children? And I think that's a uniquely American challenge. We've had these types of challenges rise up before, and we almost always end up on the right side of it. So that's why I'm here today. We're leading the political and policy charge outside to support these. I can't believe I'm on this platform with such great people, and really, it's fantastic. So anyway, I'll turn it back to Doc and let him take it from here.
Yeah, Terry, it's a $4 billion a year industry now, this gender industrial complex. Next, I want to introduce one of my best friends up here. We came in together in the Senate. Everyone knows Coach Tuberville as a coach. You know, not many people up here go by the first name, but Coach goes by Coach. But if you listen to him speak, you're going to learn really quickly that he's an educator. Over 40 years educating young men and women, and I think no one's been a stronger voice trying to protect those young men and women. And Coach, just share a few thoughts with us and why this is important to you.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. It's good to be here with you. I can't believe we're having to even do this.
I agree.
I'm a football coach, somebody that's dealt in education for 35 years, and a doctor. Two better people to be in the U.S. Senate to fight back against this. And I usually speak from the heart, but I wrote some things down today I want to talk about. I don't want to miss anything, and I want to share into the question session, but we all know by now that so-called gender-affirming care is anything but caring. And the only thing it affirms is the left-wing worldwide view that a child, not their parents, know best. It is pure insanity, and it has caused irreversible damage on countless children. This isn't about politics, folks. This is about good and evil at the end of the day. They preyed on the minds of young Americans and misguided parents, confusing them. And that is the Democrats' aim here. They want to have gender versus gender adversity. It's resulted in boys competing in girls' sports, which is absolute absurd, and men invading women's locker rooms. I can't believe it. It's resulted in the Biden-Harris administration's complete rewrite of Title IX, destroying opportunities for women everywhere. You know, I've said this many times. Title IX is the best thing that's ever come out of this building in 50 years. It gave women opportunities. I saw it firsthand as a high school coach when I first started coaching a long time ago. Because of Title IX, women and girls got access to the same resources, scholarships, and opportunities. And look at what we have today. We built something that is unbelievable. And then came this administration, which has done all it can to destroy it. That's why I introduced the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act here in the Senate, which would prevent schools from receiving funds, federal funding, if they let boys compete in women's sports. Taxpayers do not want to foot the bill for any extremist policy that forces girls to compete against biological males. The American people are sick of this nonsense. That's why they overwhelmingly, and one of the big reasons, people voted to send Donald Trump back to the White House. We're just a few months out from sanity hopefully being restored here in Washington, D.C. Any doctor who performs a sex change on a child should be put in jail, period. I'm grateful that my home state of Alabama has led the charge on all this. Our Attorney General has been fighting it at every turn. So thank you for being here today. Dr. Marshall, I look forward to working with you on this many hours in the next few months and get common sense back in this country. Thank you.
Yeah, Coach, I'm always glad to be in the foxhole with you. You remind me of some things that the Biden administration did during this last 4 years. They threatened to take away school lunches if your school didn't comply with their orders. If you didn't allow boys and girls bathrooms, if you didn't allow boys to compete in girls' sports, they were going to take away your lunch funding. They were trying to keep you out of the adoption system, out of the foster care systems as well, if you didn't bow down and support this policy as well. The CDC supporting chest feeding of babies by men, giving these men chemicals that we know had very significant side effects as well, not to mention their Transgender Day of Visibility in all days, probably the most holy of holidays on Easter to Christians as well. Those are just examples. When people look at me in the press, ask me, oh, why are you responding to this? Oh, it's because this administration has been very, very active and very, very forceful. The next person I want to represent from the great state of Illinois is Congresswoman Mary Miller. She represents the 15th district there. She's, of course, on the all-powerful House Ag Committee as well. Something near and dear to my heart, she's vice chair of the House Committee on Education and Workforce. I think this is a sweet spot for her to have influence in the House as well as the chairman of the Congressional Family Caucus and a proud member of the Freedom Caucus. Congresswoman Miller, thank you for joining us, and we'll give you the platform for a
Well,
moment.
you're welcome. And my greatest life accomplishment is raising 7 Christian conservative children.
How many grandchildren?
21.
21.
So far.
Congratulations. You got us
care
all beat.
deeply about what we're doing to our children
course.
and grandchildren. And actually, since coming to Congress in 2021, it's been my foremost goal to stand up for what has made our country not only great but good, and that is faith and family. And so the 2 pillars of our society have been greatly undermined by this transgender attack on our children. But the symptoms, these are symptoms of a much deeper problem. So to address this and other issues, I joined with Congresswoman Diana Harshbarger and Congressman Brian Babin and formed the Congressional Family Caucus. Our goal is to get a dedicated group of representatives in the House committed to finding policy solutions to protect and promote the fundamental building block of any healthy society, which is the family. And I see a lot of young people here, and I always encourage you, get married and have children. It's a beautiful life. Since then, we've introduced many bills and hosted several briefings for members and staff to provide an open forum for discussing the most pressing issues facing American families. In May of 2023, the House passed the Parents' Bill of Rights to safeguard the vital role parents must play in their children's education. And actually, I've only missed votes twice. Once I went to the border with President Trump, and then recently I got permission to miss votes. And I went out because a constituent contacted me, which Sarah Parshall-Perry helped me. A constituent contacted me about the trash curriculum that's being used in their public school. And I went out there to promote, if we want thriving communities, the schools and the parents need to work together. Parents need to be in the driver's seat of everything. So in July of this year, the House passed my bill to overturn the Biden-Harris administration's radical rewrite of Title IX. So I'm very grateful to join this panel, and I look forward to our discussion.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Miller, and for your leadership. I also want to admit, just really quickly talk about legislation we'll be introducing here in the next week or two, and that's why we need the folks whose organizations are represented here, is to help promote this legislation and to lend us your support. But we'll be introducing the STOP Act soon. The STOP Act safeguarding the overall protection of minors. So we're going to use the Commerce Act to punish people who perform any type of surgery, who use any type of medications on minors. That may be a civil penalty of at least $100,000. I think this has been used in the past for several other legislation very effectively as well, including the child mutilation surgery legislation as well, and it'll stand up the constitutional muster. Again, that's the STOP Act, safeguarding the overall protection of minors. Next, I want to introduce a young lady. And when I read her bio, I just thought of courage. That's just she just jumped out of me that this is a very courageous young lady. Paula is a former University of Pennsylvania swimmer and Independent Women's Voice Ambassador. She's the legislative liaison for this Independent Women's Forum and Independent Women's Voice. She's partnered with IW in July 2023 to advance our joint mission of defending women's single-sex spaces and standing up for the right to free speech. And I'm sure she's going to share her story, what it's like to be on a team, a collegiate competitive team, on a swim team where there's a biological boy, not just on the team, but in the locker room. Like Coach said, I can't believe we're here to talk about this. I think at a collegiate level, you're probably having 2 or 3 practices a day, and just couldn't imagine what you went through. So thank you for your courage, Paula Scanlon, and just share a little bit of your story, please.
Yeah, first, thank you so much for just having me be here. I've met everyone on this panel, and everyone here is just wonderful. Love Terry, done great work with you guys too. So, really briefly, obviously we're talking a lot about the gender issue and how it harms individuals who go through transitioning. And if you guys actually, in your packets on your chair, if you want to hear about stories, there's the identity crisis through IW. There are women who have been harmed greatly by this gender surgeries and all the crazy, disgusting things that the medical professionals are doing to them. And obviously, they've gone through so much more than I could even ever imagine. So definitely look up their stories. But this issue has also harmed people who have not gone through transitioning, and myself is I'm one of those people. I was a swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, and the administration and the university and the NCAA said, "Here's a man who wants to swim on your team. Please accept him." And his name was William Thomas. He swam on the men's team for 3 years, and just like that, he was allowed on our team. And the NCAA policy that allowed him to do so said you have to transition 1 year and take hormone suppressants. What that actually is, I have no idea. But what I can tell you is whatever that 1 year of whatever he was doing was not enough to actually make him a woman, because every single cell in your body knows what sex you are. And no matter what you're doing and however much money the medical complex is spending on you, you are still a man. And that season showed me exactly that. Thomas went on and won an NCAA championship. He broke the record in every single event that he swam for our team. And what was worse is our university told us that if we objected to him being on our team, that we were the problem. They sat us down. They said, "You're hateful and horrible. If you ever speak out against this, you will spend the rest of your life regretting it." They compared it to the next civil rights movement. They said, if you do not want to undress with this man in your locker room, that it is equivalent to not wanting to undress with someone based on their race. They told us, again, we would never be able to find a job. They said, you'll be on the wrong side of history. And the last thing that they told us was they said, if you still object with everything we've said so far, please seek psychological help. And they gave us the number for an on-campus counselor. And so this entire situation really made all us female athletes feel isolated and alone and like we had nowhere to go. And again, the worst part, though, that I haven't even gotten to yet, is how often they were making us undress in a locker room with him. This was not something that happened once or twice. Like you said, there's many practices. We have 9 practices a week. You change in, change out every practice. 18 times per week, my teammates and I were forced to undress next to a 6'4" tall, fully intact male every single day that we had to go through this, 18 times per week. And again, as a female athlete, this was just something I couldn't even imagine. It was something I never imagined would happen to me when I went off to college. And again, this is showing how deep this goes. There are individuals who are being harmed by the medical industry, but then we're also being harmed by having to deal with this in our locker rooms and in our bathrooms. And we're seeing stories now of this happening in prisons. Violent male prisoners are requesting to be moved into women's facilities. And so this is really widespread. Again, it's not just the individuals who are being transitioned. This is really everyone, everywhere. And so, again, that's just a brief about my story. I know we'll have a deeper conversation about this. But, again, I'm just so grateful to be here. But I will say it is wild to me that we have to have this conversation, that we have to sit down and say we shouldn't be mutilating minors. We shouldn't be putting fully intact males in women's private spaces. But here we are. But I am really grateful that there are leaders in this country like you guys right here that are willing to stand up for this. Also, Mary Miller, can't see you very well from here, but you are a fantastic leader on this issue. And so, again, you guys give me hope because I know that we've elected leaders that will do the right thing and that will protect and make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else.
Yeah, Paula, I'm just reminded of a couple of things as you spoke there. Speak just really briefly again, though, just about what it felt like to whatever spot was on the swim team, you got moved down a step. I don't know if he swam relays or what his strokes were and your strokes were. You spent a lifetime to be an elite athlete. What's it like to be a woman? You did all of a sudden you're in high school and you do well and you're in college, and all of a sudden you're really playing for second place.
Exactly. I mean, the hardest part, I think, for a lot of people was the outcome felt fixed. You knew he was going to win the events. The other thing is swimming is a limited roster sport, so only so many girls are allowed to go, and someone has to stay home. And so every single time he competed on behalf of our team, there was a girl asked to stay home. Notably, our conference championship, it was always a contentious time. There were girls who would fight over it a little bit. Some girls who swam the same events would stop talking to each other. It was like that before we had a man on our team. And then when he was there was one less spot that we could even get. And it just felt unachievable. And that, of course there's no room for me on that team because he was the first choice. And so, yes, again, it is discriminatory to girls to put men on our sports teams. It's discriminatory to have them in our locker rooms. It's violating on so many different levels, not just the athletic fairness aspect, because of course, but just at every single step. They continue to just say us women don't matter.
Thank you so much, Paula. Next, I want to introduce Sarah Parshall-Perry. Sarah is the Senior Legal Fellow in the Edwin Meese III Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Appreciate all the Heritage Foundation's efforts behind us in so many important values-related issue. She focuses on civil rights, constitutional governance, regulatory policy, and the proper role of courts. She's a policy consultant and widely published author with publications on topics ranging from law and public policy to education, parenting, disability advocacy, and the arts. So Sarah Parshall-Perry, welcome, and share some thoughts for us.
Thank you, Senator. Well, like everybody in this room, I come here with skin in the game because I'm not just a lawyer. I'm also former senior counsel at the Department of Education, where we worked on the correct application and analysis of what sex means in federal law. But more importantly, most importantly, I'm a mother of 3 children, 2 of whom are on the autism spectrum, one of whom is a college daughter who is now playing college volleyball. So I feel very passionately about this issue, but I think there's one thing that everyone in this room needs to understand. The gender industrialized complex in all of its applications is about one thing, and that's getting children. There are 12 million American school students that now attend a school where there is an express confidentiality policy that will keep your child's gender identity information from custodial parents, regardless of whether or not those parents assert that they have a right to examine curriculum. In the states of Colorado and Connecticut, legislators have downgraded the felony offenses for indecent exposure to minors. Why? Because they unfairly target the drag and trans communities. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University have now begun to substitute language on minor attracted persons for the less anodyne sounding pedophile. Why? Because they want you to believe that it's just another sexual orientation. That is why we have seen a proliferation in 24 states of these well-reasoned, highly constitutional, absolutely necessary bans on so-called gender-affirming care for minors. Because if states do not legislate in such a way as to prevent these minors, who the Supreme Court has said for more than 100 years don't lack the constitutional maturity, wherewithal, intelligence, or insight to, for example, be able to buy alcohol, cigarettes, sign a contract, or register for the draft, why in the world would they have the maturity to make a life-altering decision? We are actually going to see gender identity on a continuing basis at the Supreme Court, but I'm encouraged today because here we are with federal legislators who have decided that they are going to say enough. They are going to protect biological reality, our children, the next generation of children, to prevent them from being castrated and eliminating any possibility to be parents in the future. Doing this here is going to have a direct trickle-down effect in the states. They are doing what they can. They are running on a hamster wheel. I've had many good conversations with state legislators who are being very bold in enacting women's sports bills and bills protecting and preventing those minors from getting gender-affirming care. But it begins here in Washington, D.C. As the nation's capital goes, so goes the rest of the country.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Terry, I think you.
All right, let's get this thing started. Huh?
Yeah.
So I've got questions for everyone on the panel. Senator Marshall, I want to start with you, though. Relatively recently, there were the WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They had a boatload of their files released and leaked. And those files actually demonstrated that medical professionals all across the world were taking advantage of minors knowingly. And one Canadian endocrinologist in the WPATH files even referred to minors considering gender-affirming care as blank walls. Senator, my question is, if you were running a practice and found out that your doctors were engaging in such detrimental conduct, how would you handle that situation, and what's your message to the medical community?
Yeah, I'm almost speechless. I think, first of all, there'd be the state board would take away their license for starters. You think about what people are doing. Here again, it's irreversible. Oftentimes, they're doing things without parental permission. I think they would lose their ability to practice in that particular facility as well. So a whole lot of those things. But I think there's something probably even deeper, though, that's really nagging at me here, that this is an attack on our values. It goes even deeper than just profit margin and how much money you can make from this, as you're describing. But I think ultimately people that are saying that God is wrong, that the sex we were given, that God must have been wrong on this, and if you would just change your sex, it would solve all your problems. I mean, everyone that's listening, we all had challenges as adolescents, and they seem to get a little bit tougher and a little bit more challenging as you went through those tough years in middle school. But you came out in high school, and all these people with challenges that I was seeing as young ladies in my office, that they blossom into beautiful young people, young adults. They change. Everybody changes after you get your hormones. It's biologically, it's physiologically very obvious to everybody. It is just sad that we're doing these irreversible procedures, and so many of these hormones, again, I'm going to emphasize, it's irreversible. Once a lady starts taking testosterone, she's going to have facial changes that never go away. These growth GnRH analogs, they're going to cause osteoporosis, impact future fertility. We use those particular drugs for some other infertility issues for women, and we would never give them more than 6 months because they have serious complexes as well. And again, I just want to emphasize that I don't know what the percentage is going to see, but I'm going to say a supermajority of these young adolescents have some type of underlying mental challenge going along as well. I have empathy. I want to help them. But this surgery or giving them hormones is not going to solve the problems that they're having going on.
Thank you, Senator. Coach, you've been an enormous champion on the women's sports issue in Title IX. You've been one of the biggest leaders, actually, leading the pushback against the Biden administration's divisive and horrific rewrite of Title IX. You introduced the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, which would cut funding for schools that allow boys to compete against girls. How are you? We've got the Senate, we've got the House, and the White House. How will you continue to champion this bill in the 119th Congress with President Trump?
Well, we're going to keep throwing. Now we've got a little bit of power on our side. Senator Marshall and I have been playing defense for 4 years since we came in together. You can't play offense if you don't have the gavel in the Senate, so you try to block as much as you can, but we've got no help from the Democratic side. As I said earlier, it's a war against gender. I don't understand their objective. I was in campaigning in Newport Beach, California a few weeks ago with a bunch of Republicans for President Trump. And they told me at that time, Coach, we're losing sports out here. I used to tell my players when I was coaching, listen, you live in the greatest country ever. There's no doubt. There's nothing even close to us. And there will never be another. When we're gone, it's over. And I don't know why the Democrats are trying to change it. But I used to tell them the only thing this country owes you, though, is an opportunity to do whatever you want. Okay? You can achieve it. Now, you might get knocked down 4 or 5 times, but you can get back up and go again. No other country allows you to do that. Achieve whatever you want to achieve. Well, might have to change that talk because as I was talking to these people in California, there are many women's sports teams in California in the high school level that are totally men. Totally men. All the women are gone. They've run them out. Wow. And so you can't tell a young girl now that, listen, you got an opportunity. Take it. Do whatever you want. We're lying to them. Because if the Democrats allow what's happening and allow biological men to play in sports, you will see the non-existence of women's sports. And I don't understand. Listen, I don't care. I'm an American. And if you're an American, I'm 100% for you. But being American does not give you an opportunity to push other people's rights. You cannot infringe on people's rights. You take your rights and you go with them. biological men playing in women's sports is not a right. It is a political statement by the left, and we have to stop it. Because if we don't, it's going to be over for women like Paula. Spent a lot of time with other women in sports, and I've got to be friends with Caitlyn Jenner, who is one of my idols. I talk to her all the time. Caitlyn Jenner was one of the best athletes ever when she was a man. And she now is totally against men and women's sports. She's one of the biggest advocates. One of the biggest advocates. I talk to her all the time about it. And she understands this. There's got to be some common sense here. So locker rooms, competing, all this stuff is just absolute nonsense, and it's a political ploy to tear down the family of this country, get God out of our lives, and totally destroy the opportunities of women.
Thank you, Coach. One thing that you're bringing up, how this is happening all over the country, and there's some teams that don't even have girls anymore. It's just funny how this whole fight started, and you bring up these concerns, and the media's response and the industry's response is, this isn't happening. But then it turned into, how does this affect you? And it's just, this whole movement is just so full of gaslighting, from the beginning of trying to force everyone to treat them as the opposite gender and fool them, but all the way to what they're actually trying to achieve. Congresswoman Miller, a recent poll found that 72% of Americans think that it should be illegal for doctors to perform these types of gender-affirming care surgeries on minors. President Trump has also called for Congress to act on this during the 119th Congress. What actions are you taking to ensure that a ban becomes reality?
Well, this past September, the Congressional Family Caucus hosted Chloe Cole and Walt Heyer, as well as a pediatrician and child psychologist, to come and give their testimonies to other members and staff. And there was more than a few tears shed. It was very heart-wrenching. The goal of that little get-together was to build momentum for Representative LaMalfa's two bills to ban gender transition procedures for minors and to ban taxpayer funding of gender transition procedures for minors. Now we have control of the House and the Senate and the White House. Well, we have a majority in the House, the Senate, and control of the White House. So we have literally no excuse not to pass this. So, we're going to continue to highlight the issue. And, we also need to work to protect the rights of detransitioners to get the necessary health care. It was so sad. There was one woman there that miraculously was able to have a child, but she had had a mastectomy, and so she couldn't nurse her baby. But I don't know exactly what happened because I'm not a medical professional, but whenever her baby would cry, her milk would let down, and she would be in excruciating pain. Yes, so sad. And she cried because it was really sad. So their rights to have detransitioning procedures and surgery should be upheld, and then also protecting the rights of pediatricians and child psychologists who refuse to provide gender-affirming care, and for whistleblowers that are exposing doctors that are breaking the law.
I think that's absolutely right. A lot of people don't realize when this really exploded. It exploded when two key things happened. A series of states passed laws banning gender identity conversion therapy, which means that you can't actually help a child feel comfortable in their own body. You have one path, and that's transition. But then Obama rewriting sex discrimination under civil rights law under HHS and Obamacare to include gender identity discrimination. So insurance companies had to actually cover mastectomies regardless if it was for cancer or gender identity. So thank you so much, Congresswoman.
And then the Illinois governor, Pritzker family, has been funding this.
They have a whole C3, a nonprofit arm that they fund to promote their for-profit activities. It's probably criminal in some ways. I don't know. We'll have to find out. But thank you so much, Congresswoman. And Senator Marshall, I'll turn it back to you for more questions.
Yeah, Paula, let's go to you. Paula, let's go to you again. You finished college 2 years ago? How long ago? 2 years ago. You could have done a lot of things, but you've hung in there on this courageous fight. Why is this so important to you? And what message of hope would you pass on? Perhaps I have a granddaughter now. She's only 2, but like Coach said, we want to make sure she has that opportunity. So why is this important to you? Why are you hanging in there in this fight? And then what's your message of hope?
Absolutely. I mean, interestingly, I actually studied computer science and I have a bachelor's in engineering. And I'm here to educate people on how men and women are different. My mom is certainly not exactly what she expected me to do with my degree. But this is such an important issue for me. And the reason I knew I had to do this is because I see these young girls who I see myself and I see the things swimming did for me in my life. My background is I'm actually dyslexic, and so school is really hard for me. But sports is where I knew I could be equal to others. And that is what got me through school. It got me, it motivated me. It taught me all these really valuable life skills. It taught me how to work hard. And to think of one girl being discouraged from doing that, that would be heartbreaking. And that is why it's so important we speak out. But the hopeful side of this is, since I've done this, since Riley Gaines has done this, since a lot of other female athletes have done this, we've seen the tide turn. We've seen full teams come out and boycott now. They're boycotting against these male athletes. And that to me has been really inspiring. I know that we've helped them, and we've actually gotten in contact with many of these girls and helped encourage them to stay strong, to ignore the people that are trying to silence them. And so I really think we are winning on this issue. There's still obviously work to do. There's legislation to pass, which I look to you guys to help us get done. But I am hopeful, and I know that your granddaughter eventually will live in a country where she's not undressing in a locker room with men. She's not worried about doctors or teachers taking custody away from your child and, making them transition without your consent. I mean, all of these crazy things that we shouldn't even have to talk about, but I know that we're winning on this issue.
Yeah, Paulie, you sharing your story is more powerful than anything we as members of Congress can share. So keep sharing your story over and over again. We want to turn to Sarah Parshall-Perry here. Sarah, Coach and I aren't lawyers. Mary, are you a lawyer? No. So we
That's
need
okay. I'd argue there are too many of us around.
Yeah, we need some help. Title IX was turned upside down under President Biden's executive order. He expanded protections to include gender identity. And now we're hearing more and more tragic stories. This is tied up in the courts. What's going on now in the court system? Where's this going? And even just jump into President Trump, what he can do, you think, with an executive order?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this actually stemmed from a January 21st, 2021 executive order from President Biden, in which he directed the cabinet chiefs, every one of the agency chairs, to redefine sex discrimination to include gender identity or expression discrimination. Now, for those of you who don't follow all of the federal laws and regulations, there are more than 100 federal laws and regulations that were directly impacted by that very sort of swift stroke of a pen. So we've seen this play out in every one of the agencies. Coach, you mentioned earlier about the FDA's sort of holding school lunches hostage. We've seen it through the FDA. We've seen it through HUD. We've seen it through HHS, Department of Justice. Now we've seen it through Department of Education. I do believe for the current administration, this was, in many respects, the brass ring for the administration. It is the only federal law that is specifically related only to sex discrimination and no other protected category of individuals. So for those of us who benefited from Title IX, like Paula and Representative Miller and myself, and also my daughter, who is benefiting right now as she plays college volleyball, all of those dreams that we had achieved of educational equality, it's not just about sports. I think everyone thinks it's just the sports issue, but it really is so much more. Women could go to graduate school. My graduate degree was possible because of Title IX. So though the feminists were the progenitors of sex equality at the sort of waning days of the post-sexual revolution, it's done all women, including conservative women, and every woman in this room, a world of good. So we need to protect it. That simple redefinition has vastly changed the face of American education, which is why we've seen 26 state laws specifically related to protecting women's sports. 3 of those right now are on a petition for review in front of the Supreme Court. And as an aside, there are no fewer than 12 cases pending right now at the Supreme Court related to gender identity, whether it's custody, women's sports, gender medicine, or anything else. So this is clearly an issue that the Supreme Court's going to have to deal with. During the summer, when everybody else was enjoying the August recess, the Supreme Court finally got one of the 11 federal lawsuits in front of it, challenging the legality of Title IX. Specifically, the claim was, first of all, we know that this is a violation of administrative law. Second, we know it's a violation of constitutional law. And third, we know it's a violation of civil rights law. All 9 of the justices, and this is important to know, all 9 of the justices said that the plaintiff states were entitled to preliminary relief. Why? Because in the court's terms, they were likely to succeed on the merits. That means when the case finally goes up to the Supreme Court for a determination on whether or not the rule itself is illegal, and it's a merits determination, not a procedural one, I would say 90%, and my boss hates it when I prognosticate, but I have 90% certainty that we're going to see the truth win out. But there's a lot of work to be done until then. So right now, 26 states are in a state of suspended animation on the Title IX rule as a result of 11 federal lawsuits. Most are in the federal appellate circuits, working their way back up to the Supreme Court. But that leaves 24 states in a state of limbo. Of those 24 states, there are now 700 colleges and universities and more than 4,500 K through 12 schools who have also, because of the way these lawsuits have been filed on behalf of membership organizations, have also gotten a reprieve. But to say it is a mess, I think, is no short understatement. And what we need right now is courage and conviction at the national level. Senator Marshall, you asked specifically about what the president can do. The first thing I would do is take that executive order and put it on the chopping block. Put every one of the federal agency heads on notice that it is back to square one, that you are withdrawing all of the informal agency guidance, and to make very, very clear to the American people that, yes, this was a referendum, not just on immigration and the economy, but also on gender identity, because 72% of Americans believe that sports should be separated in school by boys and girls. Imagine what a novel concept. So he's got a lot of work to do. An executive order on day one should be his first task.
Sarah, a quick follow-up. Do schools have the legal basis to just say no, that we're not going to let boys on our girls' volleyball team?
If President Trump issues that executive order, they're welcome to say no, and then they put their federal funding in the crosshairs. So there is nothing, I think, more effective, having been at the senior counsel's office at Department of Ed, than threatening school with a federal investigation. That has a tendency to send the schools to heel pretty quickly.
Yeah, I always tell folks, elections at home, all those offices matter, and who's
They do.
on the school board and making those, whether it's a small college, a big university, those boards are important as well. Terry, I want you to quickly explain what the gender industrial complex is, and Europe is pushing back against them. Europe is ahead of us on this issue, in my opinion here. So what can we do to capitalize on their experience as well? But please explain who the gender industrial complex is.
Well, again, thank you, Doc. This country is full of industries. We have big tech, we have telecoms, we have healthcare, we have Wall Street. You name it, we have it. And the gender industrial complex is the gender industry. It is the hospitals that make money off of providing these surgeries. It's the surgeons. It's the pharmaceutical companies that are making cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers. It's the money-making aspect of the transgender movement. And what we have found in our research is that it's a $4.5 billion annual industry. Their goal is to transition all 1.3 million Americans who identify as trans. And if they do that, it won't be $4.5 billion, it will be $200 billion, which is larger than the film industry, to put that in perspective. It will be almost impossible to stop. They are already, the reason you see it's 1.3 million Americans. There are so many other bigger groups that don't get any type of recognition or air from our media and from our culture. But what's happening is that $4.5 billion, they're taking a huge chunk of that and they're investing it into public relations campaigns, into government lobbying, and into changing our laws, changing the funding pipelines for our government to give them more money. They are operating. The reason why we wanted to frame this as not a civil rights movement, but instead of an industry, is because that's what this is. That's exactly what this is. It is an industry that is meant to make money, and they are disguising themselves as a civil rights movement because it's not very popular to make billions of dollars from sterilizing children and even adults. The second question, Doc, regarding European progress in protecting children and adults, by the way, from the transgender industry, the big thing that came out is they had research done. They actually looked at the data and they showed that puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, gender transition surgeries, that they don't actually do what the industry promises, which is to lower suicidality and attempts at suicide and depression or anxiety. They have no net benefits. In fact, the studies that are coming out that we saw recently from California, which is as close to a gold standard study as you can get, shows that suicidality actually increases and suicide attempts increase after transitioning. And anyone with common sense or two brain cells to rub together can tell you that a sex change procedure, as you said earlier, Doc, is not going to make your life better. If you are feeling suicidal, if you have anxiety, if you have depression, buying anything, including a sex change procedure, is not going to change that. You have issues within yourself that you need to work out. As someone that's suffered from depression before, I can totally attest to that. I will say that we have a major opportunity here at home, first and foremost, with getting that $9.7 million National Institutes for Health study on American children released to the public. It's right now being covered up. It was done by a transgender activist doctor out of California, Dr. Jana Olson Kennedy. They're covering it up for very clear reasons. The results weren't great. And in fact, the results were disastrous. We have to get our hands on that report because if we get that, it will be a bombshell. And you will see public opinion, not just, it's already, it's a 30 to 40 point gap depending on which day of the week you're pulling this. You will see the intensity increase because they will have nothing and they will be shown as the con artists that they are. So we have to get this NIH study released to the public and hold people accountable over it. Secondly, we need to pass public policies that make these types of procedures for minors illegal. We need to defund it, absolutely defund it. I mean, it's unconscionable that the government and our health insurance companies are actually giving this industry that's sterilizing and mutilating children billions and billions of dollars. I think those are good places to start, but also holding your politicians accountable, making sure in the early days of this fight, and I'm sure you guys witnessed this, we would meet with members of Congress and they'd say, well, we're just not hearing about this. This isn't really an issue yet. And it wasn't until the women's sports issue really started to come into the forefront and our opponents started actually putting these people on TV and putting them in our magazines and promoting them as good things that it really started to explode and people started to see the full gamut. So I think more transparency and exposure with what our government's been doing here, banning this outright, but then also defunding it and withholding Medicare funds. I think that should be considered to hospitals that are performing these surgeries. There's no benefit to it. So they shouldn't get, and only harm. So they shouldn't get taxpayer funding over it. And then 3 is more involvement and engagement with your elected representatives.
Okay, Terry, thanks. We're going to give all the panelists just 1 minute each, maybe 2 minutes to kind of give us some closing remarks. Coach Tuberville, what do you got for us?
Well, at the end of the day, we're going to have a game plan. I mean, we're not going to just be able to talk about it without doing it. It's got to start at the federal level. President Trump can do an executive order that'll last 4 years, and it'll be gone if we get a Democrat in there. So we got to get legislation. Got to get a true law done that means something, and then we got to go to the state level, and we got to talk to our people on the state level, Attorney General, everybody on board. When I campaign, every town I go to, most important position in the state is school board. Run for school board. Get involved, because parents are the ones that are going to have to make the biggest difference of anybody. Parents standing up saying this is not going to happen, put pressure on coaches, put pressure on administrators, put pressure on the athletic director, anybody involved. Again, this is not an opportunity anybody should have. It is wrong. We've got to keep people safe. And just unfortunately, there's a lot of bells and whistles we have to go through here, but at the end of the day, it's got to be a plan, and we got to do it the right way, and we've got to get the media involved. And again, there's a lot of people that believe we're right. They just afraid to speak up. Well, I'm not, because it's dead wrong.
Thanks, Coach. Representative Miller.
Yes, well, parental rights are paramount, and the very least we should do is pass legislation requiring parental consent if any minor child wants to use pronouns that are opposite of what their biology is, and parents need to know about it. And also, I think that we need to discourage minors from using pronouns that are contradictory to their biological sex. So I don't think we should play along with the lie. So anyway.
Great. Thanks. Paula, closing thoughts?
Yeah, obviously we look to you guys for legislation, and I encourage everyone to put pressure on their representatives to not stand by this nonsense. But everyday people, I think something that I've found that has been really what works in my everyday life is we have to convince the masses that this is wrong. I think there's a lot of people that don't understand that there are children being mutilated in this country. There's a lot of people that don't understand really how deep this goes. And so my advice to you is to actually use personal stories. And so, again, I brought this up earlier. Identity crisis is just stories of women who have gone through this themselves. And I think that those stories are really powerful. And one of the girls that Representative Mary Miller was mentioning, Prisha, is in here, and she's actually a close friend of mine, and her story is heartbreaking. She's been able to have a child, but she's had a double mastectomy and can't breastfeed properly. It is stories like that that change people's minds. And so when you're faced with people in your life, bring up these stories, bring up these conversations. And it's, again, these people and those faces that are going to really turn the tide on these issues. And so I urge everyone to be familiar with the stories and then bring them up when this conversation comes up and when people in your life inevitably are defending this, again, crazy industry that's just harming everyone.
Paula, if people want to reach out to you, what, Twitter, Instagram, how do they get it? What's your
Yeah, you
name?
can follow me on Twitter, follow Y Scanlon. I post about these things when I see them, but also just if there's things you have going on or stories you see, we track the athletes, we track detransitioners, and people share their stories with us through direct messages if they're not comfortable sharing publicly. So I advise you to do that.
That's at Paula Y.
Y.
What's
yeah.
Y? What's Y stand for?
My middle initial.
I know that.
Yen. Yen.
There you go. Okay, Paula, thanks so much. Sarah, bring us home here.
I think America has Stockholm Syndrome with its captor, the gender
Wow.
identity complex, and we need to break up the love affair. And the best way to do that is through the law, not just litigation, and heaven knows I'm involved with enough of that, but with legislation, which can actually short-circuit the process. So when we see laws on the Hill that are related to women's sports or defining sex precisely, thank you, Senator Marshall, so important right now because it impacts 100 federal laws and regulations, or making sure we're not sending our tax dollars to doctors who are profiteering off the mental health illnesses of these minor kids. That's where the work needs to be done. Again, so goes Washington, then goes the rest of the nation. We're doing what we can in the state houses, but this chamber, this body has a chance for real courage, conviction, and action. Finally, not only is the law, but public sentiment, I think, finally on our side. So it's time to get to work.
Terry, anything to add?
Look, I mentioned that this industry will become worth $200 billion earlier. And that's if they can transition all 1.3 million Americans that claim to be trans. They want to grow that 1.3 number too. That's what the whole ideology, trans ideology in schools is about. They've come up with the perfect thing. They've literally weaponized our tax dollars in our schools to brainwash our kids and get them into this very lucrative pipeline. So we're going to be fighting here every day that we can to protect our children. You know, America's only as strong as its families, and it's going to be a lot harder to have families with a generation of Americans that are sterilized and mutilated and very unhappy.
You know, maybe my call to action is this: Coach and I need 60 votes in the Senate to get something like this passed. There'll be 53 Republicans that will support this. We need to find 7 Democrats that will support this type of a legislation as well. And there's people in the audience today, people that'll be watching this later on, that have senators that are afraid to step forward. They're looking for cover. But I would just challenge them. I think this is a 90-10 issue back home, that 90% of people don't think that boys should be competing against girls. And I think 95% of people back home don't think that boys should be in girls' locker rooms. I think that there are some Democrat senators out there just looking for that chance to step forward. We're going to give them that opportunity. In closing, I would just say this. Practiced obstetrics for 25 years, delivered a baby every day of my life for over 25 years. This is child abuse. To do this type of surgery, these irreversible hormones that they're giving is absolutely child abuse. These young children, adolescents, are not emotionally mature enough to make a long-term decision. Think about this country. You know, we don't, what age do you have to be to get a tattoo these days? I don't know. Is it 14 or 16 or 16 to get a tattoo? You know, you can't get tobacco till certain ages. We make you wear seat belts because, you know, you're not old enough, you're not emotionally mature enough to know that you need to wear a seat belt. I think that we as a nation need to realize that children still have some growing up to do. It's our job to protect them, to make sure, to protect them for their own sakes, but then to protect girls' rights as well. This is the right thing to do. History will look back at this 200 years from now and say, you know, can you believe that America was doing this for a while? It'll be thinking of the gladiators from 1,000 years ago. It's that type of a historical moment, and it's our job to stand up and do the right thing. I think we've got the horses out of the barn, but we're trying to get her put back in now. So appreciate everybody's help today. Very proud to work with my panel today, trying to shut down the gender industrial complex. I'm happy to stay and answer a few questions. I know we got some press here. If my panelists need to go, I understand, but we do have some press here today. Does anybody, any questions? All right, well, I've learned to call it good when we're ahead. Got to quit when we're ahead. Thanks, everybody.
Children's minds, though.
Thank you.
It starts in the mind.